Welcome everyone to this morning's webinar, Progressive Web Apps and Their Impact on Cross-Platform Testing. We're really excited for Eran and Uzi to share this great presentation with you this morning, but before we get started, we just want to go through a few housekeeping items. We'll be launching a live poll, so please give your answer to that and participate, and we'll also have an end-of-webinar survey that you can participate in. Also, throughout the presentation, feel free to use the question and answer panel, and we'll answer some questions at the end of the webinar. And for anyone that missed the webinar live, we will be sending the recording and slides after this. So without further ado, Eran and Uzi, take it away.
Thanks, Casey. Hi, everyone. Good morning, Uzi.
Hi, Eran. Good morning, everyone.
So today, I tend to say it a lot. I'm really excited, but I'm really excited today again because we are going to talk about a very cool and trending topic called progressive web application. It's catching up, but it's also complex. And today we want to give some kind of a complete guide for testing progressive web applications. We'll start by defining what is a progressive web application, how it's built from an architecture perspective. We'll talk about the different application types, debates, and maturity, and we'll give you the full testing strategy with some cool demos, Uzi, about progressive application. Q&A is not just at the end. We'll have Q&A as the webinar flows.
Before we start, I just want to mention some trends in the market. So what we are seeing is that more and more new companies starting with the PWA. It's not very common in the banking and insurance company yet, but all the social network, all the Uber types companies started to add progressive web application. Another thing that showed me that it's very hot topic, that we have our weekly podcast, and the episodes that talked about PWA was by far the highest listened one. So we decided to have this webinar, and I think this is very important technology for you to know and to understand.
Cool. So let's start, Uzi. And I think that what we want to start with is the definition of what is a progressive web. Progressive web is, Wikipedia defined it as a web application that is regular web page or website, but can appear to the user like a traditional application or a native mobile application. What it actually means is, if you're familiar with web application, especially responsive web applications, these apps are seamlessly presented across both smartphones, tablets, and desktop browsers. What progressive brings to the table on top of responsive is some native capabilities, as we will soon show you. Some of them are related to push notification, network caching, or working offline, and working with some sensors, as we will demonstrate also during the webinar.
I also can think about the next generation of the hybrid app. If you remember, hybrid app allowed you to have a wrapper to your web application and the wrapper being installed. There are a lot of differences between hybrid and PWA, but PWA, think about it right now before we drill down, like the next generation of the hybrid application.
Definitely. So why are people adopting progressive web application, which is, as the slide mentioned, challenging the native existing mobile apps? So progressive web, from one end, is progressive. What it means, it works for every user, but that is common also for responsive. But in addition, it also has something that is connectivity independent. And if you look at the visual in the left hand, 80% of survey responders on the medium.com survey responded that the offline capability of progressive is one of the top features that they look for, and that's one of the reasons they would adopt progressive.
So I just want to highlight that it means that you have an application on the device. The application is actually a web application, but if you are offline, you will be able to open the application and get some data. Yeah. This is very, very powerful, and it allows the developer and the application manager to have a better interactions with the users.
And as you mentioned, the app and we will show you some demos. We already see progressive web apps like Pinterest, Twitter, Uber is getting there as well, eBay, and some other apps that are actually adding native specific capabilities, including camera and audio, and these kind of things to the web or to the progressive web app. Uzi mentioned that not all verticals are adopting yet the progressive. For example, you are focusing on the banking. People have concerns with regards to progressive and security. Progressive is being adopted by the major browsers today, including Chrome, Safari, Firefox, Edge, and they are all served via HTTPS. So from a security perspective, maybe it's not 100% fully mature, but it has a layer of security. And one of the guidelines from Google for progressive web apps, and we'll touch it later on, is to assure security through HTTPS and other protocols.
Yeah, and you can think about it like a standard web application. If the banks or the insurance companies have have a web application that works HTTPS, the same with progressive web app. It actually lightweight browsers in some cases that open on the device and communicate with your backend server via HTTPS.
The other thing that is kind of appealing regarding progressive web apps is it's a business benefit, if you like. It's the search friendly. So search engines are actually going to give a very high rank to a progressive web like they do with mobile friendly websites and responsive. So there is another business benefit for you to switch to progressive. Google and the other search engines are actually looking for that. And one important thing, and I think, Uzi, we touched it actually last week in the podcast, is the bypassing of the app stores. So progressive web apps are installable without going through the Google Play and the App Store, and it has a lot of implications.
Yeah, we can talk about it later on. We have slides that talk about it.
Cool. So with that, let's move to a real example. We talked about offline, Uzi, and this is from last week. eBay is starting to develop a progressive web app, and actually the major benefit and use case for them is the offline connectivity. They want to accompany the user, the buyer, from one point to the end, till the end, in his buying journey, in his purchasing journey. And even if he's offline, they will allow him to go through the entire flow up until adding an item to the cart. When he's back online, he can complete the purchasing through the online progressive website.
So as I mentioned, it give the developer the capability to have a better integration with the user. But there are some complexity here that need to be defined by the product manager. One, how many items do you want to save offline? Second, what happened if the price been changed from the offline data? So we have a synchronized data that need to be done. So there are some complications, development complications that need to be solved. But the idea is that you have access to the application while you are offline, and you can do some action, and then all the data will be sent at the moment that you return to online.
Yeah, and also, the storage is another element here, and we'll touch about the storage differences between iOS and Android. So just to drill a bit down into what is the progressive, we talked about the benefits. Basically, if you have a responsive web, it's not a slam dunk, but a progressive web from an architecture perspective requires you to have at least the two following pillars. One of them is the manifest JSON file. This manifest, as you can see on the right hand here, is a descriptor file of your progressive web application. It will define the progressive web title, the launch URL, when you click on the progressive web app, where in the website you are going to land, the different, I would say, splash screens, the icons, the background colors. It's a descriptor file with all its meanings. So that's the manifest. You need to have it. The next, and this is the most important component, that's the service workers. The service workers are kind of a proxy between the progressive web and all the other sophisticated capabilities such as caching, networking condition, push notifications, and all the other cool capabilities that progressive web apps provide to the user. And a service worker basically is a JavaScript-based code that the developers can develop like eBay did on top of their responsive web to give all the added benefits. And Google today has a full developer guide for how to develop service workers for your application. And as mentioned here with the icons, Safari, starting iOS 11.3, Chrome, way earlier in the process, support progressive web app technology. Edge 17, I just updated yesterday my desktop to Edge 17. Edge 17 officially supports progressive web applications as of today. So the large, and Firefox also support it. So the large browsers today are fully on board with the trend with the progressive web app technology.
And as you can see here, the three top mobile companies, let's have Microsoft in this group, are decided to support it, and that means that we have a very powerful organizations behind this progressive app. So now let's talk about how do I install the progressive app? How does it work? So the first thing that I need to do, I need to go to the page itself, and then for iOS from Chrome, for Android from Chrome, I need to open the setting and press on the add to the home screen. For iOS, I need to press on the setting and add to the home screen. So you can see here, both for iOS and Android, I have the same way to do it. It's a different menus, but it's the same application. I have to remind you, if the page is not support progressive web application, it still will allow you to save it. But in this case, it's going to save only link to this page.
Just a shortcut.
Just a shortcut. But if we are talking about what happened behind the scene, and this is the most important thing, if we have an application implementation for progressive app on the web itself, for the Android, a new APK generated on the fly, installed on the device, and the APK is like the standard APK. It has access to all of the camera, audio, microphone, all of these device options, and it also have a very strong integration with the browser itself. So we have like APK, it's a wrapper for the application, but it's a wrapper with a lot of different capabilities that allow you to access to the different device options. For the iOS, you're downloading it from the Safari. IPA is not created. It's actually a different version of Safari, which contains, again, a lot of capability and a lot of permissions, and going to open the page. So it's going to be a Safari-based application which open on the device itself. Both of the APKs, plus the Safari instance, has a unique ID. Yep. So if you have more than one, you are going to add another APK. So it's not one APK that handles all the different PWA on your machine, but it's one per application.
Just a comment on that. I think that's one of the most important things here for PWA. We talked about the benefits, the values, and why people would shift to that. But from a technology perspective, even though Microsoft, Apple, Google are behind this technology, they need to the developers and the testers need to understand that the implementation is completely different for iOS and for Android. For Android, as you mentioned, it's an Android APK, which is not exactly an APK like you would see for a native Android application. It's some kind of a Chromium OS standard APK, and for iOS, it's Safari wrapper or native iOS application. And from an object identification perspective, it behaves a bit differently. I think we'll show it later on.
But you mentioned it when we are thinking about the testing, it can be different.
Yep.
but from the developer, the one that create application is going to be the same code.
Of course.
That's
Yep.
that's important. So let's talk a little bit about the differences between iOS and Android. And I think this is a very important slide because it can show you the current state of this PWA. So regarding the application, as we mentioned, on iOS, it's just a shortcut. It's a shortcut to a lightweight, or you can say even better, instance of Safari, which allows you to access to a different areas. In Android, you have a full APK. Regarding the offline data, so you have no limit on Android. But on iOS, after idle time, which is defined, it's going to be deleted. We talked about their offline storage, and this is important. Remember the article about eBay. They wanted to have their application supported offline. So what is the storage side? For the Android, for the iOS, is less than 50 mega. For iOS, it's less than 50 mega. For Android, it's 6% from the available storage, which can be a lot.
Yeah.
Sensor, and I think this is important. As I told you, when we have a PWS, suddenly we have an access to a new sensor. So on iOS, it doesn't work. It's still very limited. Although I told you that we have the Safari and they have like extra capabilities, and it still does not work on a lot of the applications. Access to a private information. So iOS does not allow the application to go to a private application yet. Android, yes.
Like the contacts of the device and these kind of things, yeah.
Payment system. So more and more mobile devices help you to use as a payment method. You can have any payment method that you want. Works for Android, doesn't work for iOS. And voice support works for Android, does not work on iOS.
As we can see in the screenshot below, iOS simply gives you a crash. And by the way, most of the menus for the PWA for this specific demo works perfectly fine on the Android device and don't work on the iOS device.
So I want to take it one step above. Based on this table and based on what we analyzed lately, the Android capability is very strong. It allowed you to have application-like with all the capability. In iOS, it's still missing. In iOS, it's not ready yet. So example of the application, and we saw it in a lot of applications, that a lot of action actually works on the Android, but doesn't work on the iOS. So now where you are thinking about going to have PWA, if you're going to do that, you have to remember that the iOS is not mature enough.
Uzi, just a question that came in. I will address it because it's very simple. Someone from the audience is asking, can you use Chrome PWA on iOS? So it's a very short answer, no. Only Safari PWA allows you to add a shortcut to your home screen. You don't have this option available from your iOS devices. So
you have to remember Chrome, it's created AW.
Because the instance is a Safari based and it's not a Chrome based.
Exactly.
So another thing that is important, we just talked about, the sensors and everything. So everything that drives the progressive web application is also tied into the entire digital transformation that we are seeing. Even though the web maturity, while it's growing, it's not perfect. It's starting to ramp up, as we will see in some of the demos during the webinar. So many sensors are already catching up, like the microphone, the camera, and some network push notifications and this kind of caching. So this is catching up with the web browsers, but there are still things that are lagging behind, and they are very mature on the mobile side, but still not ready for prime time as it relates to progressive web, like device authentication with Face ID, the augmented reality capabilities, and these kind of things. But as Uzi mentioned, with Microsoft, Apple, and Google behind this technology, I think that there is an interest from these vendors to also enable this next generation of apps, and these capabilities will be added to the PWA going forward.
So I must admit, in the last few weeks, I'm working a lot with PWA, and I decided to remove my Twitter application and install it only as PWA. Regarding the notification, the network, and the microphone, both, all of this works great.
Yeah.
Actually, didn't tweet anything with an image, so I believe the camera works as well. But
It should work, yeah.
but I have to admit that it looks very good. I'm an Android user, but when I try to do something from my iOS device, I had some issues there. So it's very strong for Android today. It will be ready for iOS, I believe, soon.
Yes, definitely.
Maybe it's the time for the poll.
I think so. So let's launch for those guys of you online. We want to check how excited you are about PWA, and we want to understand, are you actually looking today into adding progressive web application to your existing responsive web, or even shifting from a mobile web or a desktop web application towards progressive? And if you have the plans, what's the timeline? It will be really interesting to find out. And honestly, in other polls, I would have some gut feeling. Here, I don't.
Oh no, so I think that most of the people or never heard of, or not playing, or never heard about it, and other just starting to look into it. I don't believe that we have a lot of
Wow.
customers that started to work with it.
So Uzi, actually, I see 36%, yes, they are looking into it. 18% are starting to look into it, or at least between the next 3 to 6 months. So I would say more than 50% of the audience already are looking and considering progressive web application as the next generation application. So that's very, I'd say not surprising, but interesting.
It's not surprising because we saw that the dimension in the market, and I'm actually very happy to hear that. So can we share it with the, okay. So as you can see right now, we have like around 50% of the people going to work with it in the next 6 months, which is very, very interesting. Yeah. So so now if you're going to look for it, you have to remember everything that we just told you. It's very, very strong for Android. It's
ramping up
ramping
for iOS.
But it's really powerful, and it allows you to do a lot of strong implementation. So let's talk a little bit how that is going to affect my organization. So if we are talking about current organization that have native application, I'll have different teams, in this example, I'll have 3 different teams that write my Android code, my iOS code, and my web code. And it's going to run a different code base, it's going to run a different languages, and all of the application and all of the projects are not going to be aligned. I saw a lot of applications that the Android released a new feature that arrived only a few months after that in iOS. So if you're thinking about your customer, if you're thinking about the digital experience, it cannot be differences between iOS user and Android user.
Yeah.
And in this case, you are going to have these differences. And of course, the complexity of managing 3 different teams and 3 different codes and different bugs are really, really hard. So by using PWA, you have all the benefit of native application together with the benefit of web application.
Yes.
So you have one code, you have one team, you can have like hot deployment. It's really easy to have hot fixes. It's really easy to have full CI/CD when we are talking about web application. And why it's important and why it's easy to have a continuous deployment, because right now, if we are talking about the next part of the slide, the access from the developers to the client are not going through the Apple Store and the Google Play anymore. So let's think about state. I have my application and I have a bug. I need to release it. So I work all night, I fix my bug, I compile it, I run my automated tests, and now I'm ready to release it. The next thing that I need to do, I need to send it to Apple, wait a few days, and then upload to the store and push it to the customer, or hope that the customer will download the new version. In PWA, the only thing that I need to do is to update my backend server. So I don't need to wait for Android. I don't need to wait for Apple Store, Google Play.
Immediately care about 32 versus 64-bit application constraints as well. So yeah, it's different. But yeah.
Do we have any questions?
So, yeah, there are a few questions coming in, but we'll address them later on. I just want to move with the test strategy. I think that some of the slides are going to address some of the questions that we are getting in the background already. So, the way I see I would say the test plan and the test strategy for progressive application, there are 6 pillars in my mind for testing progressive web apps. One is to make sure that both the manifest and the service workers are well developed. The manifest and the service workers are heavily controlled and dominated by the developers. They need to decide which platforms, which service workers, which capabilities, caching, offline, push notifications, and background colors, splash screens, images. All of these things are dev-oriented and can be validated by the developers through the in-browser capability tools such as Lighthouse from Google. Edge also has the developer tools that can help you validate both the manifest and the service workers, but these are at the core of the progressive web, so you need to make sure that these are functioning well, and you can test them in many ways. So these are the 2 pillars. The other pillars are PWA-specific capabilities. We talked about sensors, we talked about push notifications, we talked about iOS versus Android. This is this bucket. Then we have cross-platform testing, and we talked about iOS and Android, but you have different browsers, and we'll touch about that because it's very complex. Object identification, it's even more complex, and this is at the heart of your test automation. We'll touch on that soon because it's a different strategy as well.
And you have to remember it's going to be different object for iOS and Android. Android is an application, it's going to be Android object. iOS, it's a standard DOM.
So you have one code base coming from developer that needs to be tested using a complex test automation script.
So the good news for the developers is that it's really easy to create the code and really easy to publish it. The bad news that the complication of the testing, automation testing are still there. More devices, more types of screen, size, all of this complication is still there.
So PWA puts the tester, test engineer, test automation architect, if you like, at the heart of the entire quality validation for progressive. Last pillar here is follow Google's checklist. Google are the most mature vendor today around PWA, and they developed, I will show you a demo soon, or at least a reference to their checklist, because their checklist is quite, I'd say, impressive. And if you follow it together with some of the guidelines that we mentioned earlier, I think you'll have a good start for your test plan. So that's basically one of the first pillars, is making sure that your manifest is well formatted, well designed, developed, and you can play with it. You have, through the application in the Google development tools, ways to navigate, to show how the manifest looks and behaves across different platforms. You can play with the default orientation, whether it launches as portrait or landscape, the different color schemes, and other capabilities. So use the Lighthouse tool to validate that the manifest JSON file is well and mobile friendly, well developed, and mobile friendly.
As we are testing today any configuration file, you need to define what is the expected result. I would like to have a standalone application. I don't want to have the browser. Define those and then validate it when you open the application. And if there are some issue, you will be able to fix it directly in the manifest.
Definitely. The next thing, I think it's the most important part of PWA, is the service workers. This is the golden feature of PWA, and this is what allows the PWA to work offline, to receive all the push notifications, to handle caching, storage, and the different features that a developer will choose to add to the app. And here again, from a Lighthouse perspective, and Google actually provides even more push notification code base that you can install and validate against your PWA site. So you have various ways to check that the push notification works, as you can see here in the slide. You can also stop, start, update the service worker to see that all the changes are being implemented and the caching catches up, the different sessions catch up. So service worker validation is the second pillar that you need to take care of.
So as Eran showed you right here, he used the Lighthouse or used the Chrome Inspect tool to test his web page, which look like easy. But let's say I want to test my Pixel device. Okay, I have a Pixel device in the cloud. How do I test it? How do I check the manifest? How do I check everything on the device? So what I want to show you right now is based on Perfecto Mobile Dev Tunnel. Dev Tunnel, I just want to remind you, is the ability to connect your cloud device into your local machine. If you are talking about Android, it actually gives you access to ADB. If you are talking about iOS, it actually gives you access directly to the device. So let's go to Perfecto Cloud. So this is Perfecto Cloud, and I'm about to open my Pixel device. So this is my Pixel device. Just reminder about Perfecto Mobile, we provide cloud of real devices located in a different location in the world. And you can see here that I want to test my manifest of the voice memo application. So the first thing that I would like to do is to create the dev tunnel. I'm about to connect to the device. And after I'm connecting to the device, I'm going to open my Chrome Inspect. As you can see, immediately I can see the device here, and I can see my application. So this is the application that's been opened. Remember, this is the device. This is the application that I want to open. This is the application that appear on the device itself. So I can press the inspect button. So I have to remind you, remote device, which I have in my application, and I can do anything with this remote device. So I'm just going to inspect the device. If I'm going into the application, immediately I have access to all of the different data. So let's see what do we have in the manifest. So you can see here that I have the images that's been used. I can have the property, I have the orientation. So all the configuration files here appear quite well. Together with that, I have the access to the worker. I will be able to see, exactly what is my code. If I'll have a Java code behind the scenes and everything, I have full access to this, and I will be able to run my application, and I will be able to run my automation, and I will able to run my debugging the same way that I execute it on local devices. So by having the web tunnel, the dev tunnel connected, I have the access to check my different PWA component on the real devices without the need of having the real devices in my hand. And you have to remember, you need to test it on iOS, on Android, on different screen size, on different resolution. So let me disconnect that, and let's return to the presentation.
Uzi, before we move on, we're getting tons of questions actually, and one of the questions is around a user already developing a PWA, and on Android it says, I'm launching the app on Android, I'm able to launch it, I see no object, I can't identify object on Android.
Oh, that's a good question, because I believe you try to launch it and identify the object with standard Appium and Selenium. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So this is really bad news. So how can I create my automation? The good news that we have a solution. We have two solutions actually. We have a way to do it with object. Perfecto Mobile identify. So our R&D works very hard to identify, to understand what happened behind the scenes, and we've been able to develop an wrapper to the wrapper, and we have full access to all the objects. One thing, and the other thing is to use a visual, also something that's related to Perfecto Mobile. So in the next version of Perfecto Mobile, we are going to add the automation capability, the the ability to see the objects. And in the current webinar, I'll show you some automation with visual validation.
Cool. So this slide basically, I would say, double clicks on what Uzi just showed you. You have the ability from your Chrome browser to go through the service workers internals and navigate between the different running service workers for your progressive web apps. You can start them, activate them, and see how they work. Next, and this is the PWA specific capabilities, and this is starting to be more mobile native related, and it touches things like gestures, sensors, camera, location awareness, these kind of things. And as you can see, and Uzi mentioned that he actually removed the native Twitter application and only left the Twitter Lite PWA. Here on the second visual, you can see that we have two Google Maps. Google Maps on the left is the native Android application. The right is the PWA. So you can actually have two coexisting applications. One is native and one is PWA. Eventually, the market will probably join into one.
I think it's early. It's early to say that, but
going forward.
Yes, but as you can see that you have two applications. So I'm now thinking as a tester. Now I need to test. Or do I need to test two applications?
Yes.
And the answer is yes. And you can see that for the native app, you have a specific property. For example, the Force Touch that works on the native but doesn't work on the PWA. PWA works a little bit differently, and the browser, of course, works differently. So yes, you need to test all of them on all of the devices, and yes, both of them can live together.
Next is the cross-platform, and cross-platform is mobile and web as responsive. This slide tells you if you know what to do when you're testing responsive web, you should simply apply the same on your progressive because it's the same. Progressives run both on the mobile device, browsers, and desktops, as well as runs only on the desktop browsers. So you have different screen sizes, screen resolution, different browser versions, different browser operating systems, desktop operating systems, so it's still all relevant. What's the big deal about the visuals below? Progressive web can create a complex situation because when you are launching a website, it can be progressive from an in-browser software. Let's take Facebook as an example. When you navigate from Facebook to a tweet or to something that you have as a progressive, you might get a different behavior or an out-of-sync instance of the progressive from the in-browser visual in parallel to your progressive that is on your device as a shortcut. So that's something that we are going to see pretty soon. And Uzi, I know that you were playing with Twitter over the last couple of weeks, and when you were trying to go from a browser to the Twitter app, it actually popped up something.
The application is not installed, so that's the only difference. So as I told you, that's the only application that I decided to work only with the PWA, and it works faster.
Yeah.
Actually, and I got all the notifications, and I was very happy from that. The only things that happened when I open a link from other application, I've got a pop-up that said that the application is not installed. So that's the only differences, the difference that I had in this experience.
Cool.
So now I want to talk a little bit. We just talked about it. So the Perfecto mobile team worked very hard in order to understand how to identify the object. And as I mentioned, they found that we have an APK for an Android and IPA. It's not an IPA, it's a lightweight browser for iOS. And we found a way to open this application. We connect it differently in order to make sure that we are getting the object tree. You have to remember it's not working the same like native IPA or standard application.
That's why the guy online told us that Appium ObjectSpy couldn't identify the object for his Android and iOS application.
Exactly. So I'm really happy to announce that Perfecto will support it from the next version, and we have a very strong connection with the device in order to get the object. So Yes, we have a way. So you can see here in this example, we have a standard automation WebDriver capability. This command, mobile PWA start, is command. It's proprietary command to Perfecto Mobile, which mark the application as PWA, which allows us as a server that communicates with this device to get the object tree. This is how Perfecto Mobile overcome the gap of the Appium. So if Appium cannot automate PWA, Perfecto Mobile with this layer allows us to communicate with the device. And you can see it's the same remote web driver. And by the way, after you're getting the tree, after you're getting the object tree, you will be able to continue and have standard automation. It's a standard remote web driver. You can find the element by XPath, you can find the element by ID, standard automation, and you can work together with that. So that's very strong news about that.
As you mentioned, we are starting to support PWA from an Appium test automation perspective for iOS and for Android. This is just an example of the Object Spy, identifying the real objects of a progressive web app in the Perfecto Object Spy.
So as you mentioned, in Appium you can get it. In Perfecto Mobile you have a full access to all the objects. They are all DOM objects. So we are talking about Safari-like application, but you are going to get standard DOM object in order to write your automation. What I want to show you right now is another strong script of automation, which shows us how to open this application and how to inject audio file into the record application and to see how does it work. So let's go again to Perfecto. Let me go to my cloud, close all my previous one. So in this case, I decided to do it in Perfecto Native because I wanted to show you how to identify and how this automation works. Okay, so this is the application. What I want to do is I want to open the device. After opening the device, I would like to press on the icon that allows me to open the application. So this is my device, and let's see. So in the visual validation, the way that it works, we're identifying a device, and we look for a specific object. It's called the visual validation, visual automation. It's a way to have an automation without access to the without accessing to the object layer. So if I press here, you can see that the first image that I'm looking for is actually the image of this plus button, and then we have another. We are looking for the record, so we'll start the record. And at the end, I'm going to inject audio file into the record, and at the end, I would like to stop the record. So let me run the script and I'll show you and explain what happened while the script is running. So the first thing that I'm doing, I'm actually pressing on the plus button. Remember, we are working on the visual area, and then I'm pressing on the record. And what happened right now, I inject audio file because it's a recorder. I'm injecting an audio file into the device. So we have an audio file, MP3 file that uploaded to the cloud, which been injected to the application. So in this demo, that can be done from Selenium, can be done by object or by object or by images. You can see how I can automate my application, but not only the application, but also to work with a specific audio on the device itself. And let's see how does it work. So I'm turning on the audio on the device, and if we'll see, or we try to see what's been recorded, you can see that I hope you will be able to hear it. That we have the record audio file on the device itself. So this is the file that I actually inject to the device itself. So let me turn it off and let's continue with my automation. So I want to summarize. You have a way to create an automation on PWA. It's not standard today in any tool by Imperfecto Mobile. In Perfecto Mobile, you have two options to do that. It can be image-based or visual-based. It can be also by a name of the or text.
Yeah.
It's a very strong automation. It can be implemented by Perfecto IDE or by Selenium.
Yeah.
But it also, and this is new from the next version, you will be able to find the object and use the same way that you are using automation. You'll have access to the DOM with the new integrations that we just finished to do with the devices.
Just to make sure that it was clear, the voice memo is a fully progressive web application on the Android device, and as you have seen, it supports the audio. We actually demonstrated injecting audio file to the application, so you can. It comes back to the first slide about sensor support for PWA. So thanks, Uzi, for that. The final pillar in the Progressive Web App Test Plan is the Google checklist. Even though we talked about Apple, we talked about Microsoft and all the other vendors that support PWA, Google is, I would say, first in line to provide the key pillars for testing and making sure that your PWA is successful, and gives you both tools like the Lighthouse and the service worker validations and the inspector. It also gives you some recommendation to test, and if it fails, also how to fix. You can see here some security related recommendation and some more consideration. You can run audits using the Lighthouse, and it will give you some insights on accessibility, on progressiveness, on security, on network conditions, and many more. So definitely leverage both what we have just demonstrated to you, the traditional functional test automation, together with the Google and the in-browser vendors tools such as Lighthouse. Before we move to the summary, we're getting some very interesting questions. One of the questions was, okay, and that's a business-related question. Guys here are considering developing a progressive web application. They already have a native application, and we have seen in one of the slides that you have the Google Maps native and you have the Google Maps PWA running together. So first of all, what does it mean? Do they need, from a user perspective, they are concerned, okay, if a user is going to have to choose, he will choose one, he won't use both. And I have, and I'll get your take on this. eBay is a good example. eBay is not throwing away the native app. They are serving progressive web application as a way for degraded network conditions. So it's kind of a backup tool for them at this stage. In a case that you don't have network connection or you have poor network conditions, to still continue to leverage all the features that eBay are providing you. Eventually,
the most important thing that you have to remember,
yeah,
you cannot have progressive if you don't have responsive.
Yeah.
So it's all about your backend server. If you have a strong responsive web, yes, do the extra effort and add support PWA. It's not a big effort, and most of the things that already implemented. At the beginning, you have just PWA that allows me to run offline with not a lot of data.
Yeah.
And based of the user usage, you will be able to understand if you want to invest more in that. Based on what I'm seeing right now, we are going to see more and more PWA soon, because we have more and more responsive web app.
Yes.
So and the gap between good responsive to a PWA, it's not that big, and then you can add more feature to the PWA, but you can start with a very lightweight PWA, which just reflects your backend server.
Definitely. So let's do a summary and then move to the other questions that are piling up. So from a summary perspective, we have described in this webinar a set of considerations and also recommendations for testing PWA application for Android, iOS, and desktop browsers. We gave 6 pillars for testing these emerging application types. We actually announced how Perfecto is positioning its testing capabilities for PWA, both from a visual testing perspective strategy as well as native with additional capabilities on top of the Appium open source. This is the PWA command start that we are adding, and we also talked about the different responsive web testing that are also a subset of progressive.
And we mentioned that for developers, it's going to be easy to develop, it's going to be easy to deploy. For the tester, it's going to be harder to test, and you need to have an automation because, again, the testing of the PWA is going to be the bottleneck of the release. So now we need to have a lot of automation, and this is why we work very hard internally in Perfecto Mobile to support it in both visual and object-based automation.
We also seen that iOS is a bit lagging behind. It started a bit later, but it's catching up, and it will catch up.
Yeah, every version is better than the previous.
Definitely. And I think that the most important point here is that for those of you online and the one that will catch up with PWA, don't reinvent the wheel. Leverage what you already know. The technology is there. The development across different platforms, mobile and web, haven't changed. You still have iOS 11, iOS 12. You have these different platforms that you need to check against. You have the responsiveness of the app that you need to check, and it's a subset of PWA. You have the tools such as Selenium and Appium, visual analysis, Lighthouse. All of these are still there. You just need to put them together as at least I recommended with Uzi within the 6 pillars and move forward. So that's with regards to the webinar. Myself and Uzi are running for the last couple of months a weekly podcast. Some of the podcasts are touching trends like progressive. And if you want to subscribe, we have this Testium pod here on the screen. Feel free to subscribe and listen to more exciting stuff. This week podcast, by the way, it's a teaser, is going to be about the emerging BDD Gauge framework, hosting Amir Rosenberg from the product team. So stay tuned. Let's ramp up this webinar with additional questions coming in. And one of the questions is about network conditions. Is it possible to simulate all network conditions mentioned using Perfecto?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. And if you're running your PWA test, it's going to run together with the network condition. And as Eran mentioned, the same test that you did until today need to be run on one more type of application, one more instance. And that's the case. Let's see if I'll dig another interesting questions. Does PWA support interactive notification? So the answer is yes, and this is very important. You will be able to get the notification or to send notification. Of course, the user needs to allow it in the device itself, but yes, it's supported.
Another question is about, from a development perspective, can I convert native app to PWA, or does it need to be a new PWA project? So native application for iOS and Android, native is written in Objective-C or Swift, and Android is in Java. PWA is a web-based application. It's JavaScript, so it cannot be, you might inherit some capabilities, but the progressive or the progress to progressive needs to start from a web application and not from a native.
One last question: does the PWA support native control? So right now, as I mentioned, in iOS it's not a standard application. In Android is APKs that generated automatically, so you don't have any access to the native control. The only controls that are available are web/DOM controls.
Cool. Just one last question. I think that is there are many more coming in. First of all, about the recording of this webinar, as Casey mentioned in the beginning, we are going to share recording and slides, so that's an easy question to address. There are questions here about security. What I recommend, because security is not a simple and in a nutshell response, testing for security, especially for progressive, we have the recommendation from Google Lighthouse. You have the security audits from Lighthouse. That's more like a white box conversation to have. Maybe we can address it in one of the nearest podcasts.
Good idea. And but in a nutshell, it's going to be the same way that you are testing your responsive web, HTTP based. Just make sure that you have all secure and HTTP.
Cool. And people are, well, we're just about to finish. Another question about the Appium community and support for PWA. People are asking if we know when Appium is going to catch up and support PWA.
They will do it eventually. From our experience, it will take a few months at least. We support it from the next week.
Yeah, and we can be in touch with the community as well. If
Of
needed.
course.
Okay, so with that, Uzi, I would like to wrap up this webinar and thank you and thank the entire audience online for joining this webinar. It will be recorded and shared with all of you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next event. Thank you so much.
Thank you.